Welcome to Whispers of the Weird. This time, we'll get to know 3 freely translated stories where people they claim to have encountered something extraordinary. Some might even say scary. We'll only narrate 3 of them this time, because the last one is a very special and long story. Let's jump straight into it. I had a small door in my room which led to the storage rooms. I was about 11 or 13 years old, and I happened to close that door a couple of times a week when I came into the room. I didn't think about anything. I just assumed that my mother didn't close the door properly when she left. After a while, I managed to joke with my mother when she noticed that I didn't clean my tracks. And I replied to her in the style of, "Every night I can close the door behind you. What if you closed it properly? I'll be right behind you." He told me that he hadn't been to Wataku for a month. I asked my brother about the door. He hadn't been there. I asked my dad. He hadn't been there either. That's when I started paying close attention to the door. I checked in the morning that it was definitely locked. I checked it after school and dinner. And then when I was going to bed, the door was open. After a few months of wondering, studying, and testing, I thought about what would happen if I didn't just close it. I opened the door before going to school and checked it after school. It was still open. I checked it after the day. It was still open. And before going to bed, the door was open. Now I lay in bed, full of imagination, waiting for the door to open on the other side of the room. I decided to check on the situation, so I turned around towards the door and focused my gaze on the darkness leading to the corridor. And so the plants were chasing me. I rushed downstairs to wake up my parents and got my brother's salary on my shoulders. We changed rooms with my brother and moved to a new house about 6 months later, due to family addition. My new physics teacher and his wife bought the house. I could have forgotten the whole event and looked away from the too gloomy imagination. However, during my last year of studying, I noticed how great a guy my new physics teacher was. They were my favorite acquaintances, and he became my favorite teacher by far. At the end of the school year, my friend and I wandered around the city with a VHS camera, and we mostly filmed crazy stuff. But then we decided to go to my old home, my teacher's, to live in the city, and to see what they had done for the place. We had a very fun tour, and I got to tell stories about all the projects my father was doing, which were a part of the house. The teacher's wife led us to the upstairs next, and introduced us to the current playroom. I asked her jokingly if she had noticed anything strange in this room, and then her face lit up. As she was filming, she asked what I really meant. And first I tried to skip the whole thing, but eventually I mentioned something about the front door. He replied that every time he comes for a walk, the front door is open. Then he told me how on the second day in this house, their German Shepherd dog had found its way into this room and refused to come back downstairs. Then it started barking like crazy and jumped out of the window. The dog had landed on the roof of Quist and ran away. The dog returned only the next day, and after that he had not stepped on the top floor of the building, not even once. Now my story reinforced his experiences, and in turn his story reinforced my own experiences. At first I thought that I could show my family the stories that I had recorded on camera, but I decided to let it be. This VHS cassette would be over 20 years old now. I moved to a several-room school, and the cassette survived all the changes. Stay back and listen to this second story. I grew up in Japan in a village that wasn't too small but not too big either. I was working in a place where I always got home around 2 to 4 a.m. I liked to walk along the side street which was near the main road. It was a more relaxed and peaceful route. On Sibakadu, there was no attention until it happened. One certain night, I turned from the corner of the street to Sibudi, and about halfway through the journey, a young woman was standing on the street. She didn't do anything, just looked up from the sky. She looked straight up, that is, completely straight up. Her neck was at an angle of 90 degrees. Her mouth was open, and a black cap hung from the ground. I hesitated at first, but because nothing strange had ever happened on Sivakata before, I decided that there was no problem here and continued my journey. When I reached the woman's location, the street was narrow, so there was not too much space. I stopped for a moment to look at her. The woman had not moved or reacted to me in any way. She kept pushing up. I fought against my hesitation for a moment and then asked if she was okay. She didn't react at all. I even looked up if the woman saw something there, but there was no sign of it in the sky. So now I thought that there must be some kind of illness, and I waved my hand to touch the woman's shoulder. She shook violently and looked at me as if she had just seen me there. I asked again if she was okay, and she was just stammering. She apologized hard and hurried off down the street in the same direction I was on my way. I decided to light a cigarette in my place and give a little space between me and that woman. She was already walking towards the end of the street when he suddenly stopped and turned his head to look straight at the sky again. The woman did not move for a total of 5 minutes, which cost me to burn the tobacco. After that, I walked home on the main street for a few nights. Now this is the last story, the very special story we've been waiting for. By the time my father died, my parents owned a cottage in Oregon, in the area of Mount Bachelor. The cottage had been put up for sale because my mother could no longer afford the running costs of the place, and even the rental of the cottage did not cover them entirely. The cottage had been set up for public sale within a month, and paperwork had begun with the landlord. So during that month, the cottage was no longer rented to outsiders, and it remained completely empty. I took this opportunity to get off my bike for a while and make up my mind about a recent event. I quit my job, packed my snowboard equipment and my dog, and went on a trip in my dad's car, which he had given to me in his will. This was a family cottage, which my parents had rented at the time when we hadn't used it ourselves. I found the keys to the place as well as the codes of the alarm system, so I didn't feel the need to stop on the way to the rental company's address and inform them about my upcoming cottage visit. The first 2 days at the cabin went by just fine, and nothing extraordinary happened. I spent the days with the dog in the snow, snorkeling, snowboarding, and in the evenings I played the piano or just listened to music on the firewood. I had stocked up on food, tobacco, and alcohol, so I was able to live quite independently. A never-ending journey of snowboarding. As I was following my dog, enjoying the DVD player, I was quite satisfied and began to feel at ease after all the drama that had followed me on my journey. The cabin was double-decker. There was a living room and a guest room downstairs and a small kitchen. There were 2 other rooms upstairs and a bar with a bedroom. Most of the time I was either in the living room, kitchen, or bedroom. I've never been to the other rooms, and I always kept their doors closed. The open doors leading to the dark rooms bother me. Anyway, it was the 3rd day, and I was back to my usual routine. I played with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he has already moved to the Green Hills. I played games and watched DVDs. It was snowing heavily that day, and I wasn't interested in hitting the road down to the highway and the car, so I decided to stay inside. And then things started to turn a little weird. There are only 2 other huts in the area, maybe about a block away from each other. The next huts are located kilometers away. There are mostly forests and very tall pine trees in the area. Tall, this is an important point later. Both of the nearest huts were empty, and I was aware that no one had been there during the last few days. I was outside with the dog during the day when I noticed something in the surrounding of the hut that reminded me of footprints. The snow was still falling, so the tracks looked quite fresh, as if someone had been there maybe 20 or 30 minutes earlier. Amen. I thought that maybe someone lived in a nearby cottage, and I had just noticed. Maybe they were just as in love as I was. Well, I don't know. The tracks led away from my cottage and disappeared into the snow towards a denser tree. I didn't pay much attention to it and went back inside. The night came and I decided to go to sleep. Midnight lay with me in bed when I suddenly noticed his ears rising to a listening position. Then the dog quickly jumped out of bed and ran to the basement. I lay in bed and I heard a noise, and I stayed quiet. The situation was somehow alarming, and I heard the dog moving downstairs back and forth. About 5 minutes later, Midnight rushed back to the bedroom upstairs, and he started to do a walking dance as a sign that he had to go to the toilet, or that he just wanted to go out. Well, damn, that's good. I couldn't refuse, so we both went downstairs and out to the front yard so that he could do what he needed to do. But the question was something else. Right outside, the dog started to pull the leash, trying to pull me where he was going. Midnight rushed towards the forest, to where the tracks had been before. He also snuck to the side of the house and wandered to the roof of the cottage. When the dog realized that I was not going to follow him, he sat down and just stared into the darkness. A little unusual for him, but it's good. Maybe there were animals in the woods that he wanted to hunt. But thanks to that, I didn't want to take any risks, so I took him back inside and we both went upstairs. About half an hour later, I was lying in bed again when I heard something that sounded from under the rubble on the roof of the cabin. The sound were only a series of 6 steps, and I made sense of it so that maybe a crow was dropping from a nearby pine tree on the roof, or then some animal from the forest had climbed in to peck at it. The only problem was that the gaps between the steps reminded me more of an adult person's steps. A perfectly funny idea. Midnight heard it too, and rushed quickly to the door of the attic, waiting for me to let him out. But now, hey, an adult man can't be scared like this. And I thought I was in pretty good shape and strong enough to take care of myself, so I grabbed my jacket and shoes as well as my cigarettes and flashlight, and went to the attic. That's what I'm talking about. I lit a cigarette outside and started to light the roof with a flashlight. There was nothing there, just untouched snow. Weird. Did I only hear my own voice? But I didn't hear anything like that either. Maybe the dog was just reflecting his own fears or worries. My mind calmed down a bit again. My eyes started to get used to the darkness, and I continued to burn the cigarette, feeling the stars and the trees around the cottage at the same time. And then I saw it, in a tree that was a little higher than a cabin, and about 6 meters above the ground. I saw a man in a rope between 2 branches. He was in a rope on one branch, and his hands were bent over his head, and they were holding on to the upper branch. Holy shit, what the hell is that? I wasn't sure if I saw it for real, and I was hoping for a standing figure. I noticed how Midnight got up and started to walk back behind me, lightly barking. The character didn't move at all. I smoked a cigarette and wondered if I should point the flashlight at the character. But something in my head shouted that I shouldn't do that. So I walked back to my room from the balcony and took Midnight with me. When we were both inside, I locked the door and flashed the flashlight towards the character, but there was nothing there anymore. I closed the glass door of the attic and returned to Petty once again. Later in the morning at night, I heard a light knocking on the door of the attic, just as if someone had knocked on the glass of the door with their finger. The knocking continued for almost an hour. Midnight knocked on the door of my room, but he didn't go in anymore. The strange thing was the feeling, as if someone was calling me to open the door. And at the same time I heard my father's voice in my head, who warned me to do it and stay in bed. I followed this advice. In the end, I fell asleep, and in the morning, everything was normal again. The next week, nothing unusual happened. I woke up. I fully admit that all of this might have been just a product of my imagination. A lot had happened in my life at that time, and I was quite broken about it all, to put it bluntly. But still, the event still bothers me, even though I have managed to spend a lot of time on it. I am currently married, and I have 2 children. And although it is a bit sad to admit, the darkness still scares me to some extent. This concludes this week's stories. I hope you enjoyed those too, and I hope you remember them in your mind on your next cabin trip. That's all for now. Thanks to our members, and kindly subscribe to Whispers of the Weird. We'll wonder again in our next video.